Welcome to Rogers That Podcast. Your hosts for today's podcast are
Jessica,
Sophia,
and Jake.
Today we have a truly exciting guest joining us, Ed Gately, an assistant director in the film and television industry. He worked on some incredible projects, including The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Edge of Darkness. Welcome, Ed. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here, guys. I do want to correct something here. It says an assistant director. I was only an assistant director at the beginning of my career. At this point, I've done a number of different jobs in a number of different departments, including the production office. I was a production coordinator for a long time, and now I work as a production accountant, also known as a financial controller, which means that I manage all of the money and budgeting and reporting for individual productions.
Mm-hmm. Background and professional questions. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from?
Sure. I was born in Western Mass right around a small college town called Amherst, Massachusetts, which is where UMass Amherst is. When I was in high school, I started taking college classes when I was 16 years old. Wound up going to the University of Massachusetts for a while, drove buses there while I was in college, and then my senior year I got an internship at the Colbert Report, and from there I went on to work on a number of different movies and television shows. I think I've done 50 or so projects at this point.
That's a lot.
Over the course of the past 17 and a half years.
Where did you go to college and what did you study?
I went to University of Massachusetts. I originally studied actually theatrical education. I was hoping to teach children how to act and do theater things. But then I wound up transitioning into the communications department, which deals with interpersonal communications, but also with mass media. So movies and TV and the news and other stuff like that.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in the film and television industry?
Sure. Well, let's see. Like I said, I started off as an intern at the Colbert Report, which was a late-night comedy show that handled news on Comedy Central. While I was there, about halfway through my internship, the 2008 writers' strike happened, which shut down the entire industry. So I wound up spending a fair amount of my internship just kind of hanging around the studio with all the people who worked on the show. And then from there, I wound up trying to get jobs on some very, very small movies where I worked as a second assistant director, which is the person who sort of organizes the next day's shoot, prepares everything for the next day while everyone is shooting the movie. And then after that, I worked for a while as a set PA, working on a number of different projects, including Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 2. I worked on Men in Black 3. I was on set as an additional PA on Dark Knight Rises, which was a lot of fun. And then I moved into the production office, which is the nerve center of a film production. And from there, I moved into accounting. And so now I deal with the money side of making an individual project.
Can you explain the role of an assistant director on a film set?
I think the assistant director on a film set is in charge of the crew. So director is in charge of the vision of a movie or television show. They're the ones who are dealing with how it looks and the visual component and the actors and their performances and making sure that everything comes together. They're what they call the auteur, or the driving force in a film. And the assistant directors are the one who help them to do that by running the logistics of everything. You know what I mean when I say logistics? it's like how, like the physical process of making it happen. And so they work with all of the various different departments on the crew to make sure that everyone is prepared for what they're doing on a given day. They handle the timing, making sure that everyone is on time and everything is moving as quickly as it can and as efficiently as it can. They handle all the scheduling. They handle interacting with the actors, making sure that they know where they need to be and when they need to be there, and they have all the things that they need for an actual film set itself. Whereas production office coordinator, which is another job that I did, handles a lot of the stuff that's happening off-set. So taking care of making sure that, flying actors into whatever town you're shooting in, setting up hotel rooms for them, setting up transportation for them, making sure that that's all organized for all the time that they're not physically on the set. That's what those jobs do.
What's a typical day like for you when working on a big production?
That sort of depends on which role we're talking about. For someone working in the AD department, the assistant directors, usually it means getting there before any of the other crew get there, making sure that everyone knows where they're supposed to be, making sure that everybody is getting where they need to be on time. Doing stuff like making sure the actors are in their trailers and they know where to be and they have all the scripts that they need to have and are ready to go, bringing them to set when they're ready to act. It can be making sure that everyone has walkie-talkies so that they can talk to each other all day. It can mean, when I was a set PA, it would mean, a lot of times it would be what we would call locking up, which is where if we're doing a shoot here and there are 100 crew members all over the place, somebody needs to make sure that they know when we're going to start shooting, when to be quiet, when we've cut and they can get back to their work. If you're out on a street, in like a New York City street, there are hundreds of people walking around all over the place. Somebody needs there to make sure that they know that there's a film shoot happening, so that they're not walking into the shot or making a whole lot of noise. I worked on a couple of different stunt units where the set PAs were very important because they would be making sure that pedestrians weren't jumping in front of like stunt cars, or I worked on one show where we did a lot of simulated traffic where we'd have a whole bunch of stunt drivers who were just driving cars, so it looked like normal traffic in New York City, but what people who are walking around wouldn't know is that two of those cars would be about to smash into each other. So you have to make sure that like the people who are walking by are aware that this is happening and are being safe, and you're doing what's called locking up the street, which means letting people know that they need to hold off before they walk through the set until it's safe to do so. When I worked in the production office, I would spend a lot of my time sitting at a desk, answering phones, getting food for people. When I worked as a assistant coordinator, I spent a lot of time just booking travel for people, just making sure that the directors and the
Did you ever have to travel?
Did I have to travel? Not at that point. At this point, I'll occasionally travel out to a set if
Excuse me.
if we're shooting somewhere that's not in Connecticut. For example, I worked on a show that was in Las Vegas, and I flew out there for a week or so before we started shooting, mostly just to interact with the crew. But at this point, I work mostly remotely from my house, so very little travel involved with that.
What was the name of the movie where the two cars?
That was a movie called Premium Rush, and it was actually about a bicyclist who, he was like a bike messenger, so he was weaving out of traffic all the time, and at one point a taxi cab hit him, and there was a lot of crazy stunts going on with that. But I also worked on Men in Black 3, where we did this crazy stunt sequence where there's like a motorcycle was motorcycle chase happening through the streets of New York. That was actually set back in time, so all of the pedestrians had to be dressed up like they were from the 1960s, and the cars were from the 1960s, so that added another level to that, because you had to make sure that there weren't people in modern day clothing walking through when it was supposed to be set back in time.
How do you take the videos about like with the cars and the motorcycles?
How do I didn't take any
Well, how
videos,
do they?
how did they do it?
Yeah, how do they take videos?
But there's any one of a number of ways. They have cameras that they'll set up on various different pieces of equipment. There's a piece of equipment that's called a dolly, which is essentially like what we'd call a sled almost on wheels that goes on a track that pushes the camera forward when you're tracking. A lot of the stunt units that I did, we used something they called a Spidey Cam, which was invented for the original Spider-Man movie, where it was a cable that was like set up over a street and set up to go down, and they would literally slide a camera along the cable to watch the cars as they were racing.
That's
down
cool.
the street.
Are there a lot of bloopers? Like
Are there a lot of what?
bloopers?
Bloopers. Yeah, it happens. You try to minimize it as much as possible, but anytime when you're doing scripted television or movies, you wind up shooting the same scene from multiple different angles, and so there's two different types of scripted projects. There's what we call single camera and what we call three camera, and so a lot of television comedies are three camera comedies where you have literally three cameras shooting at the exact same time from three different directions, so you can catch everything at once. But most of the time for films, you use one or possibly two cameras, and you'll set them up and shoot things from multiple different angles, and then you'll edit them together later. So there's a lot of times where like you wind up doing a number of different takes for each thing, which inevitably has stuff go wrong. So.
Do you guys use like the cameras on buildings too, or no?
When you say a camera on a building, what do you mean? Like setting up?
Like Rogers Park has cameras on every angles to check stuff around.
Usually we wouldn't use something that's already in place, because you want to be able to control the footage as much as you can. So we would use our own cameras. But I worked on a television show called Person of Interest, where part of that show was the perspective of a computer program that was looking through surveillance cameras like that. So they had a unit that would just go and set up cameras on buildings like that, specifically to fake the footage from those sort of surveillance cameras. But for like news shows and things like that, they'll often use surveillance footage.
How did you get started in the film industry? Did you always know you wanted to do this?
Well, when I was a kid, my brother and I used to, pretend we were on TV shows and play games like that. But, I don't know that I knew it was really an option until I sort of fell into it right after college or at the end of college. So essentially, in my senior year of college, I wanted to go live in New York City, and so I just applied to a bunch of internships that fit with my major, and I randomly got a call from a television show that I really liked that asked me if I wanted to come in and interview, which was a huge surprise to me because it wasn't something I thought that was really possible, and I wound up getting the job, and so I suddenly found myself in this industry that I had never really considered as being something that was open to me. And then once I started doing it, I fell in love with it, and I worked very hard to try and get onto anything that I could.
What was one of your favorite movies that you've worked on?
My favorite movies. I have a lot of favorites for various different reasons. I really loved being an additional PA on Dark Knight Rises because we just got to do some really cool stuff. One day we shot a bunch of footage in the subway tunnels under Newark, New Jersey, and so I showed up to work and they randomly just like told me to go get certified to go walk around subway tunnels really quickly, which I did, and then I got to go wander around subway tunnels and make sure everything was safe while they were shooting their footage. We shut down a very large section of Wall Street in Lower Manhattan, and converted it into Gotham City, while the Occupy Wall Street protests were happening. I don't know if you know anything about that, but and so we kind of just had this massive section, and they had, I think it was like 1,000 background dressed as police officers and as bad guys, and just running at each other in this massive brawl with Batman in the middle fighting Bane. And they would have these special effects guys had these essentially paintball guns with little paintballs, but they were filled with dirt, and they were shooting the ground in front of all the background to make it look like there was gunfire going off back and forth.
Oh, that's
And then
cool.
in between takes, they'd like, when as soon as they were done shooting, they'd just turn to me and then they'd start talking about some movie they work on, like working on Inception in like South Africa or something like that, and all these amazing experiences they had, and it was just really cool to get to just access to these people and to talk to them about these amazing things.
I was watching Stranger Things yesterday,
Yeah.
and I was watching one of the parts, and they were like shooting at the ground, and then it's like dirt like flowing everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's probably how they.
That's
do it.
probably how they did it. There's a bunch of different ways that they'll fake that sort of thing. But yeah, if you see bullets hitting the ground anywhere, it's probably something along those lines. Yeah.
You worked on major films like The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Men in Black 2. What was it like being on those sets?
Men in Black 3 was the one that I worked on the stunt unit for. That was the one I was saying that we had the motorcycle sequence. And what was interesting to me about that is that if you watch the movie, the entire stunt takes maybe like 5 minutes of screen time, but we wound up shooting that for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. Just because of the intricacy of having this stunt going on for however many blocks that we were shooting on, and the difficulty of having all of the background dressed up like they were, set up back in time, and set dressing city blocks to make them look like they're from the 1960s, even though obviously they were not. And it was interesting. It was a very interesting one. It was also, the chase happened at night, so almost every night I worked on that, we'd show up at like 8 o'clock at night and we'd shoot until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, which was exhausting. And then for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I worked as a production secretary. I worked on the second unit of that, which was very cool because when you work in the production office, you kind of get access to, you get a much wider view of what's going on with like a movie production, especially a large one like that. When you're on set, you're focusing on your job at that moment in time and exactly where you're shooting, whereas the production office has a lot wider view of what's going on. So I got a lot more access to, seeing the way that the overall movie was being made, in a way that at that point in time I hadn't really had an experience with on something that large. It was very cool to get to meet, the producers and their assistants, and our editors, for example, were in the same production office as us, so I could just walk over to the editors and watch them editing this major blockbuster movie together, and how that part of the process went. The costumes department was right there, so I got to talk to people about the super suits, which are insanely expensive. People don't know this. Spider-Man's like suit, or any of the bad guys' suits, they cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to make. and the one that Jamie Foxx was wearing in that movie had to be specifically molded to his body. So they made a realistic life cast of him, so that they could work on his suit and have his actual like body to work off of, rather than just like a normal mannequin. And for that, I again worked a lot of late nights. It was very weird because I'd be the only person in the office late at night, and I'd walk around a corner and there would be Jamie Foxx's body like just like right in front of me. I was like, ah! And the lights also were on a timer, so they would just like shut off randomly, and then you'd walk into a room, they'd suddenly pop back on, and they'd be like, the first couple times I did, it scared me a lot because there was just a guy standing there when I thought I was all by myself.
Have you ever worked on like a movie where you have to like take like pictures? Cause like like the Lego movie or like Coraline, like something like that.
Oh, like stop animation?
Yeah,
or I haven't. I've sort of strictly stuck to live action, mostly mostly live action scripted stuff. I did a little bit of reality TV when I was first starting out, but mostly it's just been narrative films with real people.
Did you see this? Oh, I'm sorry. How long do like when you're like taking the shot of a movie? How long does it usually take?
So movie production, it depends on the size of the production. A lot of stuff I do now is a little lower budget. I work mostly in indie movies at the moment. Those, there'll be like 25 shoot days. So usually, because I work in accounting now, I'm one of the first people on and one of the last people to leave. And those are roughly 6 months or so that I'm on them. While they basically set up an entire company. They'll do a shoot for about 5 weeks, sometimes 6, sometimes 7, and then they'll shut everything down in the same amount of time. But it can, it varies from movie to movie. Men in Black 3 went through so many different rewrites and stuff. They were actually shooting that for, I think, like a year and a half or something. But as far as the individual shoot day, standard shoot day is 12 hours. So the people who are showing up early are
It's like half of the day.
What was that?
Like half of the day.
That's like half of the day, and for the people, especially the assistant directors who have to be there an hour or two before everybody shows up and have to be there until everyone is left. Those are 14, 16-hour days, which means they have just enough time to get home, go to sleep, wake up, and get right back to work. And it can be very rough. It can be very difficult on people, the number of hours that they have to work in order to work in this industry.
Did you ever see Zendaya?
Which one?
Zendaya.
No, I haven't.
Oh.
I'm sorry to say we have not worked together yet. I've worked with a lot of people, but not.
Have you ever worked on any musical movies?
No, I've done music videos. I worked just one actually. I think I worked on a music video, but I've never worked on a musical film. I would love to. That would be really fun. I think. I love musicals. It'd be very cool to go to set and see that sort of stuff happen.
Yeah, when we did the Seussical, yeah,
Right,
I
Seussical.
still sing like the songs in my head. They're just like stuck in my head now. They won't leave.
So for a music video, they basically just play the song on loop over and over and over for your 12-hour shoot day, which means if it's a song you like, it could be good. But if it's a song you don't like, you just over and over and over. It just drills itself into your head. And by the end of it, it's every word, every note of that song because it's just nonstop.
What was the music video for?
That was a music video for a woman named Melissa Etheridge, and it was a tie-in to a show called Nurse Jackie.
Where does she live? Like, what part? Like, does she live in Connecticut?
Most of the stuff I did was in New York. I lived in New York until about 6 or 7 years ago when I moved up here because I started a family, had some kids.
Is there any particular film or show you've worked on that stands out as your favorite, and why?
Again, I have a lot of favorites for a lot of different reasons. If there's like a favorite movie to watch, I would say it's probably either Our Idiot Brother or The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I just really enjoyed those movies. There was a show that I worked on called Person of Interest that I was actually a big fan of before I ever started working on it. As far as working experience goes, I've had a number of them that I really liked. I loved working at the Colbert Report when I first started out, but everybody loves working there, so nobody leaves that, or nobody left that show. Stephen Colbert has his staff are very loyal because he's very good to them. So I would have stayed there forever if I could have. But there just weren't positions open at the time. Yeah, there's a number of different ones that I really liked.
What's like some of your favorite like themes that are like in the some of the movies?
Movies I've worked on, or just in general?
Or just like themes, like like so maybe like a colorful one, like a colorful movie, or like a dark movie.
I mean, every movie has its kind of its own thing going on, right? I'm personally a big fan of science fiction and fantasy and that sort of thing. I haven't had a chance to work on a lot of that. I think that there's some movies like the Into the Spider-Verse, the first of those animated Sony movies, was just a really amazing movie. It was beautiful. It was very colorful. It's one of the first times I've really ever paid attention to what they call sound design, which is the sound of the movie. It was very just very dynamic. Had a lot of really interesting stuff going on in it. But that's kind of the fun of movies. Like if you're on something creative and new and interesting, that you can discover something all new.
What was the hardest part of being an assistant director?
The hours are very hard on a lot of people, and it can be very difficult. It can be grueling. There's a lot of times people don't get breaks as often as they should, and it can be very difficult to sort of work your way up in this industry because it's very competitive. These are some great questions, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have you ever faced a major challenge on set that you had to solve really quickly?
Yes. One of the first movies I did, we were shooting in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and there was a blizzard that came through, and we had an actress who was supposed to be there the next day, and I was in charge of transportation, which means I was in charge of trying to figure out how to get this person from New York City, where she was landing on her plane, up to Scranton, Pennsylvania, through the middle of this blizzard, and it was a almost no budget film, which means we had a bunch of volunteer people who were helping out, and I had to try and get somebody who wasn't being paid to safely get from Scranton to New York, pick this person up, and back. And that was a difficult one. We pulled it off, but that was rough. Same sort of thing. We had a guest star on a show called Blind Spot, his flight got canceled, and he was supposed to be shooting the next day.
Oh no.
And so we had to literally hire a car to drive him, because he lived in Canada. They had to drive him over the border into upstate New York, where he could jump on a flight in order to get down in time for his scene. I think he showed up like an hour before he was supposed to go on camera.
That's good.
That was a rough one
That's
too.
crazy.
But most of the challenges I've dealt with have been logistical challenges, and there's a lot of that. That's half the filmmaking is just problem solving last minute difficult stuff.
What's the most rewarding or your favorite part of working in a film and TV?
There's a lot of cool stuff about it. I've had access to a lot of things that a lot of people don't necessarily have access to. I've gotten to go places that people aren't really supposed to go. Like I said, in the subway tunnels under Newark, or there's a point where we shut down the Queensboro Bridge, and so we were just like standing in the middle of a bridge, and they turned it into a war zone over the course of like maybe an hour. They just brought in all these tanks and rubble and all sorts of crazy stuff. I've gotten to go to a lot of places that just like people don't generally allow you to go, and see a lot of stuff that people don't generally get to see, which is cool. Like I said, we did a movie in Las Vegas, and the film crew had access to everything. So at one point, we were in this casino, and I got to go down underneath the casino and see the whole like underside of the casino, which is where all the people who work there go, which was kind of crazy and fun. So that's been a great part. One of the most rewarding things, honestly, is watching a show or a movie and getting to the credits and seeing a bunch of my friends' names, because that's always it's really cool to see people I know and people I've worked with and people I like that work on these really awesome projects, and get to celebrate them when their names come up.
Oh, sorry. What was middle school like for you, and what are some of your favorite middle school memories?
Middle school. Excuse me. That was a while ago for me. It was interesting because when I started middle school, they just moved from a sort of a junior high school model into the block scheduling that I think you guys do now, where they kind of like shift things around and you have a lot longer classes than they did before. So it was interesting because they were sort of learning how to do that. They hadn't really done that before. We also our school was under construction, so I was in a bunch of construction trailers for my middle school. It wasn't an actual school itself. But it was interesting going from elementary school, where I had a relatively small group of people that I knew, into a larger school that had 4 times the number of people, and having to meet a whole bunch of new people and adjust to a whole different way of doing things. What about you guys? What do you like about
I
your?
have a question. What did you want to be when you grew up? When you were in middle school?
I think I wanted to be a lawyer, actually.
We interviewed a lawyer.
Yeah.
But they said they didn't want to be a lawyer.
Yeah,
They
they
wanted
wanted to be a teacher.
Yeah, it changes over time,
This or that questions. Action, drama, or comedy?
To work on?
Like which
Just
one's
like
your
which
Comedy.
one do you like the most?
Well, to work on, definitely comedy. Things are just generally lighter on
More
set.
funny.
And, to watch, usually comedy, although sometimes an action movie's fun. They've all got their advantages.
Movie at home or in the theater?
That's a good question. It depends on the movie. If it's a blockbuster, definitely in the theater. If it's
Or action.
like an action movie, I would want to see in the theater. Something a little bit more dramatic is probably or a comedy maybe at home, but
It depends. Yeah.
yeah.
Do you prefer classic holiday films or modern cinema Hollywood?
Classics. Yeah.
Being on set or seeing the finished product of a big screen? On the big screen.
Probably being on set. I don't usually watch movies that I worked on. Sometimes, but
Who's your favorite, Spider-Man or Batman?
when I was younger, I would have said Batman. At this point, I think that's a tough one. Is Superman an option? We'll say Superman.
Okay. All right, Superman.
Who was the most famous person you worked with?
Most famous?
Yeah.
like that everyone knows.
I've worked with a lot of people, a lot of really famous people. For directors, I worked with the Coen brothers, and I worked with Ben Stiller, and I worked with Spike Lee. For actors, probably Tom Hanks, maybe. The Coen brothers movie I worked on had Justin Timberlake in it, so I got to meet him.
Whoa, that's so cool.
He's probably the most famous person
Yeah.
I've worked with.
Yeah.
I also did interviews at the Cannes Film Festival a long time ago, and I got to like very briefly meet Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford and some of those people, which was really cool. Angelina Jolie, you know, those guys.
Finally, what advice would you give to students who are interested in working in the film industry?
If you're interested in making films, like being a director or a writer or on the creative side of things, my suggestion would be to just start doing it right now. Like as soon as you can, start shooting stuff. Take an iPhone, take some of your friends, write yourself a little script, and start putting it together, editing it together to the best of your ability. Because, I mean, the first ones don't have to be any good, but you learn more by doing than you do anything else, and experience is going to wind up being your best ally. If you want to work in a crew capacity or a more technical capacity, I would just say, you know, start meeting people as soon as you can. You know, build that network.
We want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
It was a great
Thank you
interview.
so much.
And thank you for telling about yourself and your job. And thank you for turning into another great episode of Rogers That Podcast.
See you next time.
Bye.